Welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
I'm Sylvia Earle, National Geographic explorer, founder of Mission Blue, oceanographer, and I'm an ocean elder. Thank you, ocean elders, for sponsoring this program.
Absolutely. And this is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community on topics of wonder and interest. We're really glad to be back with everyone and hope that you've had some time to be out of doors. As we go through the conversation, please put your questions into the Q&A box, and we will get to as many as we can towards the end of the program. And we'll be adding some links in the chat as we go along for you to peruse. And before we get going, let's remind everyone that the world
is
blue, just like your jacket. And today we are really honored to have Dr. Kate Quigley joining us. We'll be talking about corals and coral bleaching, but Kate is an ARC DECRA Fellow at James Cook University in Australia, a National Geographic explorer and principal research scientist at the Minderoo Foundation and Australian Institute of Marine Science. Really wonderful to have you. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, it's just a privilege to be here with you both, Sylvia and Liz. And yeah, this is, I would say, dream of a lifetime to be able to have a conversation with you and importantly, just share the message about reefs and about what we can do to help reefs continue to thrive and be incredible in the future. So yes, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever people are today.
Yeah, we're stretching the limits of what the internet is able to do from one end of the world to the other.
So thank goodness it can.
Yeah, here we are.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Yes, I think we're at opposite ends. Something I didn't realize about Western Australia is just how far away it is from everything. So yeah, literally the other end of the world. So yes, thank you. Thank you to the internet for bringing us together today.
Zooming with us.
No jet lag.
Jet lag, no.
Yeah. A bit of, yeah, and without jet lag, and importantly, without the carbon from the flight.
Yes.
So yeah,
yes, that's critically important.
Yeah, no emissions here.
Tell us a little bit about your journey with corals so far.
Yes, so I just put up this kind of intro slide to orientate people a little bit because as you can tell from my accent, I don't really sound Australian. So what is someone potentially with my accent doing studying Australian reefs? I actually grew up in Spain, was born and raised in Spain, and then went to the United States to do my undergraduate, and then which is where I got hooked on the idea of symbiosis. So the reason why I study reefs is not necessarily just because I like to be in the water on incredible places like reefs, but the idea of the symbiosis between corals and their little tiny dinoflagellate algae and how that could work on a molecular level, on a DNA level, that was really what I guess fired up my mind. And that was because of an invertebrate biology professor that I had in my undergraduate. So shout out to Misha Matz for getting me hooked on this idea of symbiosis. And then I had the privilege of joining the Peace Corps in Peru. And then when I finished that, which was in the mountains, spent 3 years being very cold. And I said, right, I got to get back down. Got to get back down to the coast. I have to warm up for a while. So that's when I moved to Australia to do my master's and then PhD. And I haven't left. I've been here since, exploring the Great Barrier Reef, exploring Lord Howe Island, exploring Ningaloo, exploring the Abrolhos. And so, yeah, have been very fortunate to have now made my home Australia. But that's how I've gotten here. So it's been kind of a bit of a journey. But yeah, I think pretty much set on Australia from now on.
And really nice to have, acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands there in Australia as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important just to pay our respects. Australia is incredible for many ways, but also because it has the longest continuous history of human occupation in the world, stretching back, oral traditions stretching back tens of thousands of years. So there's actually story time of when people used to be able to walk across the Great Barrier Reef.
Wow.
So, given that magnitude of human history and human connection to the land and sea country, I think it's really important just to say, pay our respects to the traditional owners for all the places that I've had the privilege to work in Australia. So yeah, just to send
pay tribute to the reefs themselves that are even older than human occupation by quite a lot.
All they've seen. Imagine all they've seen. So I guess I kind of touched on this a little bit, but when people think about Australia, understandably, they think about the Great Barrier Reef. That's certainly all I knew when I first came to Australia. And so the Great Barrier Reef, like the name says, is pretty great.
Yeah.
But Australia actually has 3 other World Heritage Reefs. So UNESCO World Heritage Reefs. And UNESCO has this whole system to classify cultural and ecological locations of high value. And these are not just high value for the people that live in the country, but it's world heritage. It's everybody's heritage. So that kind of, should tell you how important these places are globally to protect for humans, for us as a species. And so we have the Great Barrier Reef, but we also have Ningaloo Reef on the West Coast. We'll talk a little bit about Ningaloo, one of the longest fringing reefs in the world. We also have Lord Howe Island, which is the most southern coral reef in the whole world. Quite a superlative there. A weird and wacky place in terms of corals, if you're interested. And then we also have Shark Bay, which is the home of corals and the largest seagrass meadow in the world. So I just wanted to contextualize that we have the Great Barrier Reef, but we also have other incredible reef estates in Australia that need protection.
For hope spots.
Yes.
For potential future hope spots. So yes, hopefully. And actually there's a few of them that are hope spots. And yeah, we'll talk about them there. So this is just to kind of orientate people. This is Australia, right? It's a massive continent, and the the really long blue box, that's the Great Barrier Reef. So when people are going to the Great Barrier Reef, they're off the coast of eastern Queensland. But then, so this is kind of a plot where we can see all these World Heritage Reefs together. And that yellow circle, that's where we're going to zoom in today. So we're going to talk about the Houtman Abrolhos. So transitioning from that map to here, we're squarely in Western Australia, and we can see just north of me, if we move up north, that's where the Houtman Abrolhos is. So just to kind of orientate people on where we are in the world. And as you have already said, this is a Mission Blue Hope Spot, which should alert you to the critical importance of this location that we're going to talk about.
Here we go.
Yeah, here we go. So the Houtman Abrolhos is actually not one big reef like the Great Barrier Reef. It's not one big island like a few other islands that are quite famous. It's actually over 200 different reefs and islands that make up this. I don't know if it's technically an archipelago, but it's a cluster of different reefs. And we can see in this photo here how low-lying these reefs are. So, if you're at the surface, the wind just blows over these places. It's almost just like sand cays with a lot of sand piled up in certain places that has consolidated more rock and more old coral habitat. But essentially, it's many, many, many low-lying islands as that forms this kind of superstructure off the coast of Western Australia.
Isn't it? You get all the variation. You get like some little deep areas, and then just a lot of the sandy, very turbid zones as well.
That's right. That's right. And not to get too nerdy on the
Okay.
geomorphology. Okay, whew. But people often ask me, how does the Great Barrier Reef compare to reefs on the West Coast? And for me, they're really chalk and cheese which is an Australian saying to mean it's really different. So chalk and cheese means it's really different. So the Great Barrier Reef is like a shallow bathtub. It's actually more or less 30 to 50 meters. It's really just like a big shallow pool with lots of reefs in it. And that's because the continental shelf is quite long. So if we imagine the eastern Australian coastline, it actually extends, that continental plate extends for quite a long time. And that's why we get all that reef structure built up there. But it also means it's really shallow. And the residence times of water, so how long water stays in that shallow bathtub, is actually quite long. So it's really well connected. It's a well connected bathtub, very large bathtub. But on the West Coast, the continental plate stops right where the coast stops. So that's why we have these incredibly deep drop-offs. So exactly what you just said, where you could see the dark water, you could see that dark water, and just right on the other side, right close, is where there's reef and a lot of like back reef and really shallow areas. And that's because that's that continental shelf. It goes right there and then it just drops off. And that's really why Western Australian reefs are really unique, because you get all this biodiversity associated with shallow corals, but then you get these really big megafauna that like deep water. So that's kind of the difference. So if we just go back, sorry, I was rambling about geomorphology.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. So there's a lot of history as well. So I'll talk a little bit about the history of the Houtman Abrolhos. So there's a very famous wreck up in the first part of the island groups, which is the Wallaby group. And you can see here that there's the Batavia wreck. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's a really incredible story of survival. Yes, that's right. And there's some really nice corals in that area as well. And if we zoom to the next slide, you can actually go to one of the museums in Perth, in the Shipwrecks Museum, and see the hull of this vessel. And this was a Dutch vessel that was exploring. This is before GPS. This is before satellite phones. You don't know where the reefs are. It's very perilous to be a mariner. Well, it's still perilous to be a mariner, but particularly so then. And so this was a wreck. They hit a reef, and there was mutiny. There was cannibalism. There was adventure, but it's probably one of the most harrowing Australian shipwreck stories. And so if you are a history buff and like undersea archaeology, the Houtman Abrolhos is also really important for preserving not just the natural history, but also the human history of exploration. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, because there's a few really incredible books as well, and I would invite people to read those.
That's great. And I think the wrecks are so interesting as well because, yes, it's man-made debris, but you often know exactly or have a really good idea of when they sank and
Yes.
storytelling and so forth. And it gives you I guess as a scientist, a nice sort of clean slate to then figure out like how long does it take for them to be sort of, patriated by corals and sponges and other marine growth. And I know Sylvia did a lot of that in looking at the wrecks of Truck Lagoon.
Truck Lagoon,
Yeah.
yes.
And
Okay.
you can go through and sort of clean off some spaces and see how quickly things start to grow back.
As like a good, as you say, like a fresh slate almost, just kind of how long does it take for nature to come back after humans have plowed into.
It's possible to get minimum growth rates. You don't.
Oh yeah.
You know exactly when the ship found. They may be younger than the whatever the date is, but they can't be any older than
That's
when
true.
they should.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's a good natural baseline, almost like a mini experiment. You could do like a mini experiment. Very interesting. Yes, yes. I doubt the mutanters were thinking along
No,
those lines, but
we
us
just
as
wanted,
scientists,
just wanted to get out of there.
yeah, that's it. That's it.
But we always have to think about, oh, what else could we do?
Yes, yes. Putting our scientist hat on, right? What can we measure? What
Yeah.
can we measure in this context? I love it.
Is it Easter group?
Yes. So the Easter group is the middle cluster of this Houtman Abrolhos chain. And for me, it has a lot of significance because when I was there for the first time in August this last year, I was reading a lot, like kind of as the trip came up very serendipitously. I was offered a berth and I said, yes, absolutely, let's go, completely without really knowing much at all. So I was doing my homework as we were going from island to island. And one late night, I was on Wikipedia and trying to again read more about anything to do with these islands, and I found a little tidbit about why it's called the Easter group. So if we go to the next slide, I hope yes. So this is actually one of the places that Darwin visited on his big travels around the world, which is documented in his book Voyage of the Beagle. So obviously we know him predominantly for developing the theory of natural selection. And that's all laid out in that book. But he also has an adventure story called Voyage of the Beagle, which I would alert people to. And I'm sure, Sylvia, I'm sure you've read it. I'm sure you've read
Library.
it.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, it's probably up in your
it is.
bookshelf. And it's called the Easter group because they got to the islands on Easter morning, and this was a passage written by one of the first mates on the boat with Darwin. He was in his 20s at the time, and so I was reading this as I was on the boat, and I just felt the hair on my arms stand up. It was just kind of like I just, Darwin is one of the greats. Yeah. So I don't know if I should read this out loud. I did truncate it a little bit.
A little bit because we do have a lot of slides to get through.
That's true. That's true. But I would just invite people to just think about that, as we are exploring, just think about the first explorers. And I just think they must have been some of the bravest people, because to have faith in the navigational skills and, the stars, and just setting out, not knowing when you're going to come back, what you're going to find, is
really having to be much more, I think, observing the natural world, a lot more carefully, because they always talk about being able to watch the movements of, dolphins or the seabirds, and kind of getting some hints that there may be land close by.
Yes.
Things.
So what is this passage? Read it.
Yeah, you want to.
So yeah, so and I did shorten it a little bit because they tended to write very long in the past.
Very wordy, yes.
Very wordy. So at daylight, we found that the summit of a large island in the center of the group of the northward bore north 21½ degree west, about 9 miles. We now beat to the southward in search of a harbor where the ship might lie in safety while we went to work with the boats, and were fortunate enough to discover one close to the northeast point of a large island lying in the center of the group to the southward, which we named Easter Group, and the harbor Good Friday Harbor, to commemorate the season of the Christian year at which we visited. So, this island group is called Easter Group because this was the time, this was the day that they got there. And you have to enter a reef, that especially when you don't have good nautical charts, at daylight, so you can actually see the reef.
Have a clue, yeah.
You have a clue. And we still navigate like that today. So I just thought I'd bring that up in terms of the history. Um,
Like
and
this-
when we talk, oh, go ahead. Sorry,
There's so
Liz.
much history there too.
So much history.
Yeah.
And this is kind of our modern history. And so Abrolhos is known for the fishing villages that they have. So this is kind of, if you can imagine being 3 hours from the coast of Geraldton, and there's all these little fishing houses, brightly colored, brightly painted, each belonging to different families. So this is a photo provided by Alan Bradley, one of the people who put in the original Hope submission for this location, I believe. And so he provided this photo, and it's just such a beautiful photo of standing on one of these small little jetties, kind of built right into the. It's almost like Waterworld, if you've ever seen that film,
Yeah.
Waterworld. So people, there's still a lot of human history there now. There's still a lot of wonderful Australian culture in the Abrolhos.
And it just seems like, diving, snorkeling, all the sort of the water related activities are just really the bread and butter of the economy in many ways. And these heritage sites and kind of the
Yes.
bucket list destination for divers. And it's really
Yeah.
important to kind of bring the attention, the awareness about the underwater park. Do you get a beautiful picture like this where you just kind of see the sunset and
dive in?
Yeah, but
Dive in.
really about like what's below the surface.
Yeah.
And I love this slide because it just
Yeah.
really shows, how much the currents can impact this area, kind of going from the north and really
Mm.
swirling and mixing these layers. And it's an incredible visual.
Yeah, this really struck me for the same reason because like, diving in, just like what you said, what's below the surface, this is what is going on below the surface, and plus more, right? Because this doesn't really show all the little micro eddies, but these currents dictate everything. They dictate the temperature of the water. They dictate where baby corals are moving, where baby fish are moving. They dictate where things grow, where things can't grow. So I really love this picture because it shows us how everything is connected, how all the oceans are connected. But it also shows us that we might not be able to see the force of the currents with our eyes, but it really does dictate everything. And if we kind of zoom in on the West Coast, it's this Houtman Abrolhos area is so important because it's the confluent zone of two of these currents. So
Yeah.
it's the one of the Lewin current, which comes down, brings warm water, and that is juxtaposed by a cold water current that comes up. So at the Houtman Abrolhos, you have the warm water go down one side, and that's where we get a lot of corals, so a tropical ecosystem. And then we get a cool water current that goes up on the other side, exactly. And that's where we get big, lush, temperate seagrass, kelp, seaweeds, and it's just a different kind of system. So in one location, because of this meeting of different temperature currents, that's where we see this kind of really interesting tropical and temperate divide.
Yeah.
And it's a great place to do experiments.
In the Galapagos,
experiments.
not exactly the same, but there is a convergence of cold water currents. Cromwell coming from the west and the Humboldt coming up along the South America and then bending toward the west. And both converge at the Galapagos, which is right on the equator. So coral reefs and tropical fish and other warm-loving creatures in the surface waters, but you can actually be diving there with your head in the tropics and your toes in Antarctica.
Yeah, and you feel it.
You feel it.
You can feel it.
And kelp occupies the sunlit areas where where it's shallow enough for these cold water kelp to thrive, but above, it's too warm for them. So it sounds like it would be a really interesting comparable
Comparison.
comparison to look at
Yeah.
where you're doing your work and those who are have that in a small area to get such diverse systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I have a PhD student looking at this kind of transition zone, and I will tell her, Sylvia Earle says Galapagos is similar, and I'll point her to the direction of that work, and we'll see if we can draw in some of those comparisons. So yeah, that it's and over a small area. Yeah.
Suspect in South Africa where you get the convergence of warm and cold, there might be, kelp right up
As well.
and then coral reefs from there.
From there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what's happening now with the surface temperatures and these anomalies is really incredible.
Yeah.
The way-
Yes. Yeah. So that was kind of the I wanted to start off with all the incredible history and ecology of the Abrolhos. But unfortunately, this year, happening right now, we are in the middle of a marine heat wave. And probably one of the worst marine heat waves that Western Australia has ever gone through. So the last one, the last really big one was in 2011. But because of this cold water current, we have been relatively buffered and protected by a lot of the mass bleaching on coral reefs that have been going on for the last few years. So we actually just got out of the fourth global mass bleaching event in terms of a world community on coral reefs. And at that moment, Western Australian reefs were not bleaching. But now they have started to bleach. So I guess nowhere is safe. Nowhere is safe from the effects of climate change. And these are photos taken by a photographer up at Ningaloo. And this is a massive Porites coral, sometimes called bommies in Australia. And generally, these kind of big, massive species tend to bleach last. They get the name of more resilient. But the kind of warming that's going on in the West Coast at the moment is so extreme that even these more resilient species of coral are bleaching. And you can see from this photo that it's not just patch bleaching. There's not just a little bit of white on the top or a little bit of white on the side, but it's actually bleached all the way down to the bottom. And these corals can be hundreds of years old. People who study, it's just like coring a tree. You can core the inside of these corals in a responsible way, and you can count the growth rings. So you can actually say this coral could have been alive when Darwin was naming the East group. Yeah. So, these are old individuals that have seen a lot of stress, and they are bleaching. And so this really should be a wake-up call to the extent of warming, the extent of danger. And so I just got back from the Great Barrier Reef last night, and I go up to Exmouth next week. And we now actually have bleaching going on both coasts in Australia. We have it going on the East Coast, and we have it going on the West Coast. And the West Coast in particular is absolutely devastating because it's from the top of Western Australia down to potentially in the Abrolhos. So there's actually a team leaving on Saturday that will be looking at doing surveys in terms of seeing what bleaching is going on all the way south. So even when there's this cooler water, it's still so warm that things could still be bleaching. So this is happening right now. It's happening on both coasts in Australia, and in the West Coast in particular, it's really bad. So it's a good time to alert people that there's never been a more important time to speak up for nature if we want nature for the future, for future generations. So this is another photo of bleaching, really devastating bleaching at Ningaloo.
And it's really, I think, very accurate to call it the underwater bushfire because, you know, I think the world was pretty stunned to see some of the big land fires that Australia suffered and that other areas of the world have been
And
suffering.
California.
California,
California.
we've had some brutal ones, and it's
Mm.
not just the intensity that's increasing, but it's the frequency. And
Absolutely.
I think the same can be said for the coral reefs, that, you know, where they had some resilience in past because they get a warming event every 10 years, every 20 years, something like this. Now it's 4 times every 10 years or worse.
So
No,
Kate,
go ahead.
there's some evidence that areas where there's protection for fishing, where lobsters are still thriving, where fish are, and nobody's taking the mollusks, really protected areas, that they tend to be less affected by bleaching and more resilient when they do. For example, is the south coast of Cuba. They have the same temperature impacts, but they are this level of stress is not as great. Is there a place to compare in Western Australia where even the fish and lobsters are safe?
Yeah, so I think that just shows how important marine protected areas are.
Yeah.
You know, like I always think about bleaching as a sickness. It's a sickness. It's like getting the flu. Just because you get sick doesn't necessarily mean you'll die. But if you can take out the other pressures, it's much more likely that you'll recover. And so MPAs, marine protected areas, do a really great job of removing other pressures. And so that means that the corals that are there, they don't have to contend with bad water quality. They don't have to contend with dynamite fishing. They don't have to contend with trawls and things like that, all the other pressures that non-marine protected areas have to go through. So when a big event like a heat wave comes through, they're more able to handle that stress because
I mean, some fish and other creatures are critical to the health of the coral, like parrotfish.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
The fish need the corals, but it's a
exactly.
system, and where the parrotfish are stripped away for human or the grouper,
Exactly.
they
Yeah.
and they are part of this system. It's not just the coral; it's a system.
Yeah, I think the parrotfish especially because I've seen sometimes where the coral is bleached and then you start to get like the filamentous algae and things like that kind of overtake them so they can't even recover even as the water cools.
The algae go fast, and the corals.
Exactly.
And I love being underwater and hearing those parrotfish kind of like gnawing away.
Yeah. Nom nom nom.
Nom, nom.
It's quite loud.
They're really loud. And other grazers on the
Close
reef.
your mouth when you chew.
Yeah, no, they don't.
Yeah, love a good parrotfish.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this kind of, I think, is a good example of recovery. You know, you mentioned when you were talking about the fires that now they're so frequent. And that's part of the problem that we're having with coral bleaching. Now there's so much bleaching, the window of recovery is getting shorter and shorter. And so you have these incredible parts of the network, like parrotfish, they can't come in and do their job. Or there's mortality, and then there's no time for baby corals to recruit onto a part of the reef that has been cleared away by herbivorous fish to go and settle and grow again. So we need all of these linkages. We need to protect all of the different nodes in the network, so to speak, so that these recovery processes have enough time to come in and recover. So it's really concerning when we start to take out pieces of the puzzle, like parrotfish from fishing. That's why MPAs are so important.
Lobsters are like the little engineers of the reef.
Engineers of the reef.
Some of the mollusks that are predators on the coral. I mean, it's a system again.
It's
Yeah.
a system.
But
Yeah.
it's also some of the things we're putting into the water that are the
Yeah.
Mhm.
whether it's the introduction of excess turbidity, or it's inappropriate sunscreens, or it's sewage runoff, or whatever it
Mhm.
happens to be, fertilizers. It's
Fertilizers, yeah.
kind of these cross sections that are just tattering the ability of
Not to
the
mention the acidification of the ocean.
that,
Yes.
yeah. But it really
We
does.
don't make it very easy for corals, do we? We're
No.
not,
But they exist.
just how many things. So I kind of had this slide here to take people through what bleaching is. So kind of what I said before, bleaching is a stress response, and it's a stress response from the coral animal. Yes, coral is an animal.
Yes.
And the symbionts, the little symbiotic dinoflagellates that live inside of the coral cell, they are the solar panels of this relationship. And so when warming happens, or when there's very high light, fresh water inputs, some kind of stressor, that relationship, that crosstalk, that symbiosis breaks down between the coral animal and the symbiont, and that's when the symbiont. It's not really expulsion. There's a lot of different things going on. Some might be leaving. Some symbionts might be leaving knowingly in their own accord. Some might be booted out by the coral because they're not functioning well. And unfortunately, when it's really, really hot, it's just cells falling apart.
Yeah.
Like when it's really bad, and it's just it's just literally the animal falling apart. And
I
so
remember during one of the big bleaching events, and some divers had been in Australia, and they reported kind of coming out of the water just kind of coated in
Goo.
Just sort of the dead detritus of the reef, and
yes.
they just broke down from it. They were just so gutted from that experience. So sad.
And that those reports are coming through more and more because it's not just hot water, it's extremely hot water. And so bleaching can actually be thought of as a natural stress response for the coral, a mechanism for them to accommodate additional stress. But when it's so hot, we actually get a hopscotch straight to mortality. And that's what I think you're describing with this goo, is they're not bleaching actually sometimes. They're just dying outright because it's so hot. And if that's not terrifying, if that's not concerning, bleaching is scary enough. But when you short circuit a potentially adaptive process straight into mortality, I mean, that is catastrophic. So yeah, it's just another wake-up call, I think, for us that it's too hot, far too hot.
This is a slide as well, because it shows that in general, corals have adapted to live close to that, the sweet spot, right?
That's it. Yeah. And this is why corals are really canaries in the coal mine, right? They are, people probably wonder, why do we always hear about corals doing so poorly? And that's because naturally they live close to their thermal thresholds already. They're in this predominantly very thin band around the equator. And so when we get 0.2 of a degree, 0.5 of a degree, 1 degree, it doesn't seem like a lot to us, but to the coral, it doesn't really have a lot of room to move before it's starting to hit its maximum ceiling. And that maximum ceiling is set by, biological processes that are pretty fixed in terms of how much temperature can a biological cell handle. And so, we are seeing reefs suffer now in these early days of climate change. But what ecosystem will be next? What ecosystem will be next in terms of destruction? So this was, I tried not to put too many figures in. We can probably just click on through this one. But this is really just to show that we don't have a lot of room to move in terms of temperature. it's absolutely critical that we keep warming below 1.5 for reefs. And again, 1.5 to 1.6 to 1.8, people might feel, is it really worth fighting for a point of a degree in terms of
Yes.
climate change action? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes,
Tipping
it is.
points.
Tipping points.
Yeah. And this one, you know, people are like, oh, I'll just, if it gets too hot for me in Arizona, I'll move to
Mhm.
Canada,
Yes.
and
Yeah. Where
corals,
the corals are going to move.
it's not like they can just sort of like pick themselves up and carry off to the next northern region.
That's it.
Tough for them to move.
Tough for them to move. There is a bit of movement, and actually lots of work around the Abrolhos that we're looking at is, are we going to see more corals moving south on that cool water current? So for organisms, there's kind of really just three different pathways. You can move, but there are limits on how far you can move. You can adapt. So this is genetic adaptation, and we're looking at that now. And then unfortunately, you can die. If you can't move and you can't adapt, that's when we get extinction. And we know that we've already seen 20 marine extinctions, and hopefully those will be the last ones.
We don't know when a coral reef is blown up
Oh,
or bulldozed.
yeah. Oh man.
Or whatever the other impacts. We know that there are a lot of endemic species regionally within coral reef systems. So it's the number that we never got to know before they were gone. Because we destroyed before we exploited before we even got to. It's happening in the deep sea. It's happening everywhere. On the land, of course, in rainforests, in the sea. So
these
extinctions is just a patch on the actual number that have gone.
That's a really good point. 20 might not seem like a lot to people. People are like, oh, 20 extinctions, but silent extinctions.
Silent, yeah.
The big guys that we actually know, but the big ones that count really in every way, but they're not being acknowledged. Their extermination.
We might not have even discovered them.
Well, but by comparing the diversity in an intact, healthy reef, reefs that are comparable in terms of what was there before they were eliminated, you can get some idea of what has been lost. When they're simply extinguished.
Yeah.
Well, we don't really know. We don't know how many coral species there are. I'll put hand on my heart as a coral biologist and say we don't. There's a lot of great people working on it.
Stations or the polychaetes or
the microbes.
The microbes. That's right.
So
Marjorie Rieka is a crustacean specialist, did such a comparison some years ago in terms of trying to estimate how much has been lost to diversity in coral reefs that we never got to know.
Yes.
By their disappearance next to robust systems. It's terrifying.
It is terrifying, and it's just what a wasted opportunity to not know, to lose things before we ever had the chance of photographing them, describing them.
Yeah. How are your genomic research projects? How are they helping in this bigger effort?
Oh yeah, important, vital to know.
Yeah, so a lot of my work is really just trying to figure out, can things adapt? And if they can, how long will it take? There's a lot of models to show how warm things might get under different choices that we have as humans in terms of our emissions. But can corals keep up with the rate of temperature change that coincides with these different futures that we have based on our industrial choices? So I'm trying to figure out essentially what reefs of the future will look like. if present day reefs have, for example, lots of isopora, a lot of acropora, and a lot of montipora, and each of these coral species do something different on the reef in terms of function. Some might be the builders of the reef. Some might glue the reef together. So different species perform different ecological functions on reefs. But maybe in 1 degree of warming, maybe we start to lose some of these rare species like montipora, which could be the glue of the reef. Well, what does a reef look like? How does it function for those polychaetes, for those fish, for the other organisms that depend on them? What happens in terms of reef function when we actually lose those rare species or those species that bind the reef together? And then at 1.5 degrees, what happens if we start to lose the things that fill in the reef and the glue of the reef? And then we just get the builders. And all of our data so far suggest, as well as work that other people have done, is that 2 degrees is just too much for reefs. And we start to see large scale extinctions of things that are even temperature tolerant or things that are really, really common. So, things that you think, oh gosh, there's so many of them. They exist in such large distributions. They'll never go extinct.
Couldn't possibly have any impact,
Couldn't possibly have any impact. This 2 degree mark, 2.5 degree mark, it doesn't seem like a lot of temperature to us because we can turn on an air conditioner and drop the temperature in the room 5 degrees, 8 degrees, whatever our comfort zone is.
Yep.
But corals can't. They can't do that. And so 2 degrees, we're really talking about the loss of upwards to 90 to 99% of coral reef cover. And who knows about the diversity? Just as you already pointed out, we don't have the full picture of diversity, but we're probably going to lose things that we don't even know exist at the moment. And more importantly, we don't know what they're doing. We don't know what they're doing.
The other piece of it too is that so many of these big reef structures, seagrass meadows, things like that, they are really critical in absorbing a lot of the wave and storm surge energy that comes
That's right.
from the shore. So the more
That's
depleted, the more degraded, the more
Yep.
fragile these reefs become. That energy just comes, full bore
Yep.
to the coast, and it is a much larger impact on coastal communities. So
Exactly.
natural defense systems, for all kinds of reasons, but coastal defense is a huge one.
Absolutely. There are buffer zones, just like our mangroves, like imagine a big cyclone or a big cyclones are the southern hemisphere, hurricanes, hurricanes where you are, all of that action is buffered. So this is kind of close to the end, and I'll just say, so Hansen is one of the early climate scientists who was speaking out about the linkage between carbon emissions and temperature increase early on, like in the Nixon administration and before that. And he was a scientist. And if you read his work, he talks about being nervous to be a spokesperson. But I will say, as scientists, we have a responsibility. We absolutely must speak out. And I liked this quote from a paper that he published last year. Scientists will share the responsibility if we allow governments to rely on goals for future global greenhouse gas levels. So I think that squarely puts messaging and responsibility of speaking about the impacts on natural ecosystems onto scientists. Obviously, not only scientists, but I do think that, let's use our voice to speak out against this. And I asked ChatGPT if it could make an image of Sylvia Earle coming in a seaplane to the Abrolhos.
How about a submarine?
This is what it came up with.
I love it.
That's great.
I can send it to you. But it's very interesting. It put you in a astronaut / diving rebreathe. I'm not sure what kind of but you're actually diving in the plane. So I think that's
Great.
pretty correct.
That's pretty funny. But it
jump out and.
But it does point.
You're ready. That's it.
It does point to there is some future of using sort of AI to help us understand some of these big changes that are happening, and not just to make kind of fun images, but
That's
to
it.
really help us hopefully crunch some of the data and historical data especially to try to help us understand like where are the really priority areas that we absolutely must 100% protect, hopes of making a more resilient future.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, it's not just for creating fun images like this, but yeah, we'll see how machine learning and AI really hopefully help empower scientists to work smarter, faster, better, so we can make additional gains for conservation. So that's my slideshow. So hopefully kind of gave you a little bit of a idea about the work that we're doing and this incredible hope spot off of Western Australia.
And we do have a few questions. So we're going to jump into some questions and keep the conversation going. Michael is asking, do you find that many of the indigenous folks in Australia are involved with marine research and preservation?
Yes. And I will just say that the most rich experiences that I've ever had as a scientist are working collaboratively and co-developing work and research with traditional owners in the marine space. And as the traditional custodians of the sea country, I would even say that it is our responsibility to work in that co-designed fashion with traditional owners. So that's something I really see leadership in Australia on that. And I'd like to see even further leadership on that in terms of managing sea country for sea country by traditional owners. So having, we call it a kind of joint management framework where I guess more like Western frameworks about management and traditional frameworks about management are weaved in together. It's not one over the other. It's not two sitting next to each other, but it's actually weaved in together into a better, more comprehensive type of management.
Kate, the reality is that the natural systems can only bear so much extraction. And when our numbers are small and the natural world was more complete, this close relationship, taking some but never taking so many, that the system would collapse. I mean, there were extinctions throughout all of our history caused by humans, even when our numbers were small. But who were successful in a long relationship, as they have been in Australia, we're talking of tens of thousands of years, you learn what can work. I mean, still crocodiles, there's still, many, the greatest era of extinction has been largely in the last 200 years and mostly the last 100 years.
The last 40 years.
Especially in the last half century, right?
Yeah.
It's part of a numbers game, and it's also using wildlife for commerce, not for need.
Yes.
Wild animals into money.
Yes, yes.
It to be with birds, but we've kind of gotten over the idea to go out and kill songbirds just for but we've gotten over that idea for fish. And just it's not a matter that we have to eat them to survive.
Yeah.
What really made it possible over tens of thousands of years. You never turned, I mean, it was a different economy, but the model natural resources are there to be turned into money. Whether it's oil or minerals or fish. You look at it with a different attitude, not respect, and how can we go on and have a compatible future together? How much can I sell you for?
The commodification of nature.
Exactly.
And that is something that I think I really respect about traditional culture is there's an intrinsic right for the environment to exist, even if it's not beneficial for us in a monetary sense. And that should be enough,
The way we understand.
the
They
way
keep
we
us alive,
understand.
after all, so.
That's it. That's it. But not in terms of like dollar signs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you would think that would be the only reason it has a right to exist because it exists.
What's this idea of trash fish?
All right. We
Yeah.
have more questions. Few more
Yeah.
questions to get to. We
Okay,
have
sorry.
5 minutes left.
Okay, good.
Martin is asking, what can be done about underwater bushfires in Australia and remote areas of New Zealand besides prevention and education?
Yeah. Well, this is a great time to talk about nature and talk to your representatives about nature. Maybe every individual person might not feel like their vote has a lot of power, or the way they spend their money, or way they put what we call superannuation, where you put your retirement money. But all of those individual choices, when summed up over many, many, many millions of people making the same choice, can have a big impact. And so this is the time. There's a lot of elections going on. There's a lot of choices to be made now. And if you care about nature, talk to people about nature, talk to people about strong environmental laws, get out there, get your voice heard, and think about what can I do as an individual, and then how can I get others around me to think for nature, have a voice for nature. So yeah, this is a very critical time in the history of the world, where we have some choices to make, and we can either vote for a future that's livable and full of biodiversity, or we can choose different pathways. But now is the time to speak up for nature and make your voice heard.
Complacency can kill us.
Yes.
Yes.
Complacency
Yeah.
is stone cold.
Yeah. Don't stay on your sofa. If you care even just a little bit, get up, get out, and get involved.
100%. And every single dollar spent, choose how to spend that wisely.
It's a vote.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it is a vote. Okay. Michael is asking, are we starting to see any corals expanding into waters that previously would have been just too cold for them prior to flooding?
Great question, and I'll try to keep it short. So there's limited evidence so far. There's a lot more evidence in fish that they're moving towards cooler waters, but this is another really important reason to protect the Houtman Abrolhos, keep it as a hope spot, get additional protection and information on it, because it is this temperate zone. It is the point in which movement is going to be most able to be seen. So this is one of the reasons why we're very interested in this location, and potentially places like the Galapagos, Sylvia, that you mentioned before, South Africa. This is where we'll start to accumulate that evidence. So I'd say that for corals, we're still unsure. We don't have enough evidence to definitively say what will and what won't do that. But it's currently, a very hot topic, not to put a pun in there, but yeah, pun intended.
You had a quick shout out for a book you wanted people to think about.
Yes. So Juice is the new book by a very prominent Australian author named Tim Winton, and also a crusader for protecting Western Australian reefs. And it's a future, if this is the future, if we continue on as business as usual, in terms of emissions, in terms of polluting, this is what it will look like. So it should be a wake-up call. It's beautifully written. It's an incredible story. I think some of the proceeds go to conservation efforts. So if you're looking for the new read, I can only recommend this one. I couldn't put it down as soon as I picked it up. And Tim is also a fearless crusader, and was just at the rally for Save Scott Reef last night. And so, get online, read about Tim, read about the conservation issues that he's pushing for, and the additional protections that he's pushing for, and it's well worth your time.
And again, encourage people to choose wisely and choose to have your wildlife alive, not swimming in lemon butter.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. Keep it in the oceans.
In the
Yeah,
ocean, yeah,
What's my favorite fish? A live one.
a live one.
A live one.
And we are
I
at the
love-
top of the hour. And before we close today, Sylvia and I would like to say thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kate,
Thank you.
thank you to our producers, Ocean Elders, and thank everyone out there in the community who keeps showing up and diving in with us. We are very, very grateful for all of you. Water connects us all. We're going to be back in April, pending dates from her deepness here. And remember, remain curious and take care of the ocean.
As if your life depends on it, because
It does.
it does.
It does. Thank you again, Kate.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure and a dream to sit here with you this morning and have this chat. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you. Take care. Bye. 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 Bye.